They accused me of never helping my family. 7 years of mortgage payments sat quietly in my bank history. My name is Rachel Morgan, and the night my parents said I never helped this family, they said it loudly at a table full of people. It was supposed to be a simple Sunday dinner. Nothing fancy. Just my parents, my younger brother Daniel, his wife, and a couple of relatives I barely saw anymore. The kind of gathering where conversations stay shallow and everyone pretends things are fine. We were halfway through dessert when my mother sighed dramatically and set her fork down. "You know," she said, looking straight at me, "it's exhausting being the only ones who ever sacrifice for this family." I glanced up, confused. Before I could speak, my father nodded. "Rachel, you've always been distant. You never really help when it matters." The room went quiet. Daniel didn't look at me. He stared into his coffee like it might save him. His wife shifted uncomfortably, then said nothing. No one defended me. No one asked what they meant. I felt heat rise in my chest, but I kept my face neutral. "Never help," I repeated softly. My mother waved her hand. "Don't twist my words. You live your own life. You're not the one carrying this family." There it was. The verdict. Spoken like a fact everyone had already agreed on. I wanted to laugh. Not because it was funny, but because of how confidently wrong they were. For a moment, I considered correcting them right there. Pulling out my phone. Ending the conversation in one sentence. But instead, I nodded. "I understand," I said. My father looked relieved, as if my silence proved his point. Conversation slowly restarted, awkward and forced, like nothing had happened. No one noticed my hands shaking under the table. No one realized that for the last 7 years, I had been quietly holding their entire world together. And they had no idea what they'd just accused me of. Growing up, I was always labeled the easy one. I didn't cry much. I didn't ask for help. I learned early how to solve my own problems quietly, because every time I tried to speak up, someone else's needs seemed more urgent. My parents used to say it like a compliment. "Rachel's fine," my mother would tell relatives. "She's independent." What that really meant was that I didn't require attention. So I stopped receiving it. When Daniel struggled in school, the house revolved around him. Tutors, meetings, endless reassurance. When he needed help with rent after college, my parents scrambled to support him. When his marriage hit its first rough patch, they blamed stress, money, timing, anything except responsibility. I watched all of it from the sidelines. Whenever I faced something difficult, I was expected to handle it. On my own. Quietly. "No fuss. You'll figure it out," my father would say. And I did every time. Over the years, that expectation hardened into a role I couldn't escape. I became the one who didn't need help, which somehow turned into the one who didn't deserve acknowledgment. If I didn't ask, they assumed I didn't give. If I didn't complain, they assumed I wasn't carrying anything. By the time we were adults, the family story was already written. Daniel was the one who needed support. My parents were the ones making sacrifices. And I was just there, existing on the edges, doing my own thing. No one ever asked how I was managing. No one wondered what it cost me to always be fine. So when my parents said I never helped this family, it didn't come from nowhere. It came from years of a narrative where my strength erased my contributions, and my silence was mistaken for absence. I had been assigned my role a long time ago, and no one thought to question it. What no one at that table knew, what no one had ever thought to ask, was that I had been paying my parents' mortgage for 7 years. Not once or twice. Not during an emergency. Every single month. It started quietly, almost accidentally. 7 years ago, my mother called me late one night, her voice tight and controlled in the way it always was when she didn't want to admit fear. My father had just retired earlier than planned. The pension wasn't enough. A payment had been missed, then another. The bank had sent a letter. She didn't ask me to help. She didn't have to. I heard the panic behind her careful words, so I logged into my account the next morning and made the payment. I told myself it was temporary, just until things stabilized. They never did. 1 month turned into 6. 6 turned into a year. Eventually, it became routine, an automatic transfer scheduled so early each month that I stopped noticing it leave my account. I never told Daniel. I never told anyone. I didn't even tell my parents I was still covering it after the first few payments. They stopped talking about the mortgage altogether. The stress in their voices faded. The house stayed theirs. And I stayed silent. Part of me believed that this was what family did. You stepped in when you could. You didn't keep score. You didn't need applause. Another part of me was afraid. Afraid that if I said something, everything would change. That they'd feel embarrassed. Or worse, that they'd start expecting more. So, I carried it alone. I rearranged my own budget. Put off moving. Said no to things I wanted without explaining why. Every month, I chose stability over recognition. And the strangest part, it worked. Their life went on uninterrupted. Family dinners stayed warm. Holidays stayed intact. They never lost the house. But silence has a way of rewriting reality. Over time, my help became invisible. Not because it wasn't real, but because no one ever saw it. So when my parents looked at me and said I never helped this family, they weren't lying in their minds. They simply had no idea who had been holding the floor beneath them all along. For a long time, I told myself that staying quiet was the right thing to do. I believed that if I helped without announcing it, my intentions would stay pure. That love meant giving freely, without needing acknowledgment. My parents had raised me to believe that family support wasn't something you kept receipts for, it was something you did because you cared. So I never corrected them when they talked about how hard things were. I never reminded them who had stepped in when the mortgage was on the line. I let them believe they had figured it out on their own. At first, silence felt noble. But slowly, it turned into something else. Because when you don't speak about what you give, people stop imagining that you give it all. My quiet support didn't make me generous in their eyes, it made me irrelevant. The more dependable I was, the less visible I became. And with time, expectations shifted. What had started as help became obligation. What had once been gratitude turned into entitlement. They began to assume that if something went wrong, it would somehow work itself out. They never wondered how. They never wondered who. I noticed it in small moments. Comments about how everyone else was doing their part. Jokes about how I was always off living my own life. Little remarks that painted me as detached, selfish, unconcerned. Each one landed quietly, like a pebble dropped into water. Barely noticed but slowly changing the depth. The truth was, my silence had trained them. It taught them that I would give without being seen, and that there was no cost to overlooking me. By trying not to make my help a burden, I had turned myself into one, and the longer I stayed quiet, the harder it became to speak until silence wasn't kindness anymore. It was a trap I had built around myself, one payment at a time. The night it finally broke wasn't dramatic at first. It was small, familiar, almost routine. After my mother's comment about how I never help, the conversation drifted into something worse. Comparisons. They always came next. Daniel's been under so much pressure, my father said, glancing toward my brother. He's got a family to think about. My mother nodded. He doesn't have the luxury of just worrying about himself. I stared at my plate. The words settled in slowly, like sediment. Then came the request. We might need a little help again soon, my mother added casually, as if she were asking someone to pass the salt. Things are getting tighter. Utilities are up. Property taxes too. And in 8 times. Daniel shifted in his seat but said nothing. His wife avoided my eyes. No one asked if I was able. No one asked if I wanted to. They had already decided. Something in me went still. For years I had absorbed moments like this, the assumptions, the expectations, the quiet rewriting of my role. I had told myself it was easier not to push back, that keeping the peace mattered more than being understood. But that night, the familiar weight felt different. My father sighed. You know, Rachel, if you really cared about this family, you'd step up more. That sentence landed harder than anything else. Not because it was cruel, but because it erased 7 years of sacrifice in one breath. I felt the room blur at the edges. Not from anger but from clarity. I suddenly understood that no amount of quiet giving would ever be enough. As long as my support remained invisible, it would never count. They weren't asking for help anymore. They were testing how far they could push without resistance. I took a slow breath and folded my hands on the table, steadying them. For the first time in years, I wasn't calculating what it would cost me to stay silent. I was calculating what it would cost me not to speak. And in that moment, I knew the truth would come out not to prove anything, but because I was done being rewritten by people who refused to see me. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse anyone. I didn't even stand up. I simply reached for my phone. The movement caught my mother's attention first. She stopped mid-sentence, watching me with mild irritation, as if I were about to interrupt something important. My father frowned, already impatient. "What are you doing?" he asked. I unlocked the screen and placed the phone face up on the table between us. "I want to show you something," I said. My voice surprised even me, calm, steady, almost detached. They leaned in, more curious than concerned. Daniel glanced over, confused. I opened my banking app and turned the screen so everyone could see. At first, no one understood what they were looking at. Just rows of transactions, dates, amounts. The same name repeated again and again. My mother squinted. "What is this?" "Scroll," I said. She did. Slowly. Her breath caught halfway down the list. The payments were unmistakable. Same amount. Same recipient. Month after month. Year after year. Mortgage payment. 7 years' worth. My father's face drained of color. "That can't be right," he said quietly. "It is," I replied. "Check the dates." Silence fell over the table like a heavy blanket. Daniel leaned closer now, his brow furrowed. "Rachel, what is this?" "It's your house," I said. "Your parents' house. I've been paying for it." No one spoke. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator in the next room. My mother's hand trembled as she scrolled further back. Her lips parted but no words came out. She looked at my father, searching for denial, for an explanation that didn't exist. You paid all of this?" She finally whispered. "Yes." "For how long?" My father asked, his voice barely audible. 7 years. The number hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. My mother pushed the phone away as if it burned. "Why didn't you tell us?" she demanded, her voice sharp with panic now. "Why would you hide something like that?" I met her eyes. "Because you never asked." That landed. Daniel sat back in his chair, stunned. "I didn't know," he said quickly, looking between us. "I swear I didn't know." "I know," I replied. "And I meant it." My father rubbed his face with both hands, his composure cracking. We thought we'd manage somehow." "You didn't," I said gently. "I did." No one argued after that. There was no yelling. No denial. Just the slow collapse of a story they'd been telling themselves for years. The story where they were the ones carrying the family. The story where I was distant, uninvolved, selfish. It shattered quietly, right there at the table, buried under 7 years of proof they could no longer look away from. And for the first time, the silence wasn't mine. The apologies didn't come right away. At first, there was scrambling. My mother kept shaking her head, as if disbelief alone might erase what she'd just seen. My father stared at the table, jaw tight, replaying years of certainty that had just collapsed. Then the explanations started. "We didn't know," my mother said softly. "If we had known, but you did know." I interrupted, not unkindly. "You just didn't know it was me." That stopped her. My father cleared his throat. "You should have told us, Rachel. We would have handled things differently." I nodded slowly. "That's exactly the problem." Daniel finally spoke, his voice strained. "I'm sorry. I really am. I never thought." "I know," I said again. And this time, it sounded final. What followed weren't real apologies. They were attempts to rearrange blame. Questions about why I'd stayed quiet. Comments about how family shouldn't keep secrets. Suggestions that maybe I liked having control. Not once did anyone ask what it had cost me. Not once did anyone say thank you. The truth was, they weren't apologizing for the years of judgment or the careless words. They were apologizing because the story they relied on had fallen apart, and they didn't know how to stand without it. I realized then that timing matters. An apology offered after exposure isn't about remorse, it's about damage control. And hearing it that way stripped it of any comfort it might have brought. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I simply listened, already understanding that whatever came next would have to change not for them but for me. I didn't make a scene when I told them I was done paying. There was no dramatic announcement, no raised voices. Just a quiet sentence, spoken clearly, after everything else had been said. I won't be covering the mortgage anymore. My mother looked stricken. My father opened his mouth, then closed it again. Daniel stared at me like he wanted to argue but didn't know where to start. For the first time, the consequences weren't theoretical. They were real, immediate, and I felt lighter. Not because I wanted them to struggle but because I had finally stepped out of a role I never agreed to play forever. For 7 years, I had mistaken responsibility for obligation and love for endurance. I had believed that if I carried enough weight quietly, it would somehow earn me understanding. It doesn't work that way. Silence doesn't protect relationships. It distorts them. It teaches people to overlook you, to rewrite your efforts as absence, your strength as indifference. Walking away from that dynamic didn't make me selfish. It made me honest. I still love my family. That didn't disappear with the payments. But love without boundaries isn't generosity, it's erasure. And I had erased myself long enough. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this: helping in secret may feel noble, but it rarely leads to respect. Being seen isn't the same as being loud, it's about refusing to disappear. I left that night without guilt, knowing I'd finally done something I should have done years ago. I chose myself. And that choice, quietly made, changed everything. If you've made it this far, I want to hear from you, not just as a viewer but as someone who understands what it's like to give quietly and be misunderstood anyway. If you were in my place, would you have stayed silent as long as I did? Or would you have spoken up sooner? Tell me in the comments. Your perspective matters more than you think. What this experience taught me is something I hope you carry into your own life. Helping without boundaries isn't love, it's self-erasure. You can be kind and still protect yourself. You can support people without letting them define your worth. Silence might feel peaceful at first, but over time, it teaches others that your sacrifices don't count. If this story resonated with you, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel for more real stories about boundaries, family, and self-respect. Your interaction helps these stories reach the people who need them most and reminds me I wasn't alone.